Welcome to the Deep Dive. So today we are taking you into the heart of West Africa.
Right, to a country that has, well, tragically become the global epicenter of extremist violence.
Exactly. Burkina Faso. And we're starting today with a pretty startling modern paradox. I mean, imagine waking up tomorrow and being told by your government that your right to vote has just been suspended.
Yeah, and not just, delayed by a few weeks because of a natural disaster or something.
Right, no, completely erased from the calendar for the next 5 years.
It's hard to even wrap your head around.
It really is. But that is exactly what Ibrahim Traoré, who is the world's youngest head of state, by the way, has just explicitly declared.
To both the international community and his own citizens.
Yeah, he basically announced that democracy is simply no longer the priority for his country.
Which is, it's a blunt, totally unapologetic message. It completely shatters the usual diplomatic playbook.
It really does, because usually don't authoritarian regimes kind of fake it?
Oh, absolutely. Even the most authoritarian regimes typically go through the motions, right? They hold nominal elections just to keep up international appearances.
Right, just to check the box.
Exactly. But here we are seeing a public, intentional rejection of the whole democratic premise altogether.
So to understand exactly what is happening here and, how a nation reaches this breaking point, we are pulling from a few critical sources today.
Some really fascinating material.
Yeah. We are looking at a highly detailed excerpt from a piece called #FirstPostAfrica, the Traore Doctrine, Revolution and Ruin in Burkina Faso.
That one is great for the geopolitical context.
Definitely. And we are placing that analysis alongside a brand new, highly alarming April 2026 report from Human Rights Watch.
Which brings a lot of grim realities to light.
It really does. So our mission today is to unpack this whole situation for you. We are going to explore the radical shifts happening in Burkina Faso, the deliberate suspension of democratic norms, and, well, the really heavy human cost of what the military government is calling a fight for its very survival.
It's a lot to cover.
It is. And just a quick reminder before we really get into the weeds here, our goal today is not to take a political side, not left, right, west, or east.
We're just looking at the facts.
Right. We're here to impartially lay out the facts, the government's own claims, and the human rights allegations presented in our sources, so you can really understand the full scope of this crisis.
Because looking at this through an analytical lens is really the only way to grasp the mechanics of what happens when a state decides that, well, survival and civil liberties are mutually exclusive.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the core facts of what Ibrahim Traoré has done over the last few months are just staggering.
They really are.
He hasn't just paused the idea of democracy. The military government has systematically dismantled the whole apparatus of it.
Right. They officially dissolved the political parties.
Completely outlawed them. And they officially extended their military rule by 5 full years.
5 years is a very long time in politics.
It's an eternity. To really visualize the argument the government is making here, think about it like, well, an extreme medical intervention.
Okay, I like this, like triage.
Yeah, exactly. It's like putting a critically injured patient into a medically induced coma to save their life. The body is in trauma, it's failing, so the doctors shut down the higher functions.
Which, in this case, would be the democratic process.
Right. They shut it down so all the limited energy can go toward just keeping the heart beating.
Surviving the immediate threat.
Exactly. But in this scenario, the doctor just announced the coma will last for half a decade without even asking the patient's family for consent.
That's a great way to put it.
And that is where I really have to push back on the rhetoric in the First Post-Africa piece, because Traoré claims the nation is undergoing a progressive popular revolution.
He uses that phrase a lot.
Right. So my question is, how does a military leader reconcile dissolving all political opposition, just silencing dissenting voices, with the claim that this is a popular revolution?
Well, what's really fascinating here is the psychological framing of security versus liberty.
Okay, tell me more about that.
So, to a military commander who is in the middle of a brutal daily counterinsurgency, the slow, deliberate machinery of a democratic parliament doesn't just look inefficient.
Well, how does it look to them?
It looks like active sabotage, because politics, by its very design, requires debate,
Right.
disagreement, opposition.
Right, people arguing over budgets and strategies.
Exactly. And in a stable environment, we recognize that friction as a healthy democracy. But when a state is quite literally facing a daily battle for its physical survival against well-armed extremist groups.
Which Burkina Faso absolutely is.
Right. Leaders like Traore view the political arena as a critical vulnerability. They argue that a nation just cannot afford the luxury of political campaigns and legislative gridlock when armed groups are actively seizing territory.
Like they're trying to tear the state apart, so why are we arguing in a parliament building?
Right.
So the framing is basically that unity is the only armor they have left, and politics destroys that unity.
That is the absolute core of the Traore doctrine. He is totally redefining the term popular revolution.
It's not about voting anymore.
No, not at all. It is no longer about a movement of democratic expression or civic participation. He is framing it as a collective militarized mobilization for national survival.
Wow.
Yeah. The military government is banking on a very raw calculation regarding human needs. They believe the populace values physical security far more than they value the abstract right to drop a ballot in a box every few years.
Security meaning just the ability to wake up alive.
Right, to tend to their farms without fear of a massacre or travel between cities safely. By dissolving the parties, they are attempting to eliminate any alternative power centers that could question the military strategy.
Or just divide the public's focus.
Exactly.
But the danger there, and just sticking with that medical coma analogy for a second, is what happens to the patient's muscles after 5 years of lying completely still in a hospital bed?
They atrophy.
They atrophy entirely. If you shut down civic institutions for half a decade, if you ban public gatherings and dissolve the political parties, you are letting the democratic muscles of the whole society just waste away.
That's a very real concern.
I mean, even if the nation survives the extremist crisis, waking that civic system back up, getting citizens to trust the process again, and getting the military to actually hand power back to civilians, that is incredibly difficult.
Yeah, history provides very little optimism on that front, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Power seized indefinitely under the guise of an existential emergency is, well, it's almost never relinquished voluntarily once the emergency fades.
Right. They just keep finding new emergencies.
Exactly. And the institutional memory of how to run a coalition, how to compromise, how to conduct independent journalism, all of that degrades rapidly.
It just disappears.
Yeah. That is the massive generational gamble that Burkina Faso is being forced to take under this current regime.
And it's not just a domestic gamble, right? Because Traore's refusal to hold elections doesn't just silence dissent at home, it instantly triggers a massive diplomatic tripwire abroad.
Oh, absolutely. The international backlash is immediate.
Because you can't publicly declare a 5-year pause on democracy and expect your traditional Western alliances to just keep writing security checks or, providing intelligence.
No, you can't.
This internal shift inherently causes a massive fracture in their foreign policy.
The domino effect is, frankly, undeniable. Because Western alliances, particularly those involving the United States or the European Union, operate on a system of conditional support.
Right, there are always strings attached.
Exactly. They provide military assistance, counterterrorism training, financial aid, but those resources are legally and diplomatically tethered to human rights benchmarks.
And democratic timetables.
Right. So when a junta officially declares that elections are off the table for 5 years, those Western capitals are often bound by their own domestic laws to suspend military aid. The tap just gets turned off.
Which leaves a government that is desperately fighting a war with suddenly empty hands.
Exactly.
And the core facts of this geopolitical shift laid out in the first post-Africa piece are radical. I mean, Burkina Faso has completely severed its traditional security ties.
They really have.
They expelled the French military forces from their country, forces that had been there for years, assisting in the fight against insurgents.
Gone.
Yeah, gone. And they have made a deliberate, highly publicized pivot toward Russia. So what does this all mean?
It's a huge realignment.
It is. And Traore is selling this massive shift as a revolutionary break for true African sovereignty, right? A way to finally shake off the old colonial ties of France. But I have to ask, are they actually achieving true independence here, or are they just changing the locks on the doors and handing the keys to a different global superpower, like firing a strict landlord and signing a lease with a ruthless debt collector?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you really begin to see the harsh mechanics of the global marketplace for security.
The global marketplace for security. That's a grim way to look at it.
It is grim, but it's accurate. When a nation is facing an overwhelming, localized insurgency and suddenly finds itself cut off from Western support, it has to go shopping for a new patron.
And Russia's open for business.
Exactly. And Russia offers a completely different business model than France or the U.S.
How so? Walk us through that mechanism. How does the Russian security apparatus operate differently on the ground in a place like Burkina Faso?
Well, it is entirely transactional and completely devoid of ideological conditions.
Meaning they don't care about the election.
Right. The Russian model, which often utilizes private military contractors or state-backed paramilitary groups, does not care about your election timetable. They do not send human rights monitors to attach conditions to their weapons shipments.
They just send the weapons.
Exactly.
Well,
From Traore's perspective, this is a highly pragmatic solution to a very immediate problem. He needs attack helicopters. He needs tactical ground support.
and diplomatic cover, probably.
Yes, he needs a powerful ally with veto power on the UN Security Council to block international sanctions against his regime.
Wow.
And Russia provides all of that without lecturing him on democratic norms.
But wait, what is the transactional benefit for Moscow? I mean, if Russia doesn't care about democracy, do they even genuinely care about stopping the extremist violence in West Africa, or do they just want a geopolitical foothold?
The extremist violence is merely the entry point. The actual goal is strategic leverage and resource extraction.
Ah, there it is. Resources.
Right. Moscow wants to project power into a region that was traditionally a Western stronghold. By filling the security vacuum left by the French, Russia gains immense diplomatic influence in Africa.
Which is huge for them on the global stage.
Exactly. Furthermore, these security agreements frequently include lucrative concessions for Russian state-affiliated companies to mine gold, uranium, and other critical resources.
So they're getting paid in natural resources.
Basically, yes. So to answer your earlier question about independence framing the expulsion of French forces as a reclamation of sovereignty is a very potent, very popular domestic narrative.
Right, because of the colonial history.
Exactly. Decades of post-colonial frustration make that a highly effective rallying cry. But relying heavily on Russian paramilitaries for your basic state security means your survival is now completely tethered to the geopolitical interests of Moscow.
It's a profound vulnerability disguised as liberation.
That's a perfect way to phrase it.
And that deeply transactional approach to security, where the sole priority is regime survival and counterinsurgency without any human rights strings attached, that brings us to the horrifying consequences on the ground.
The human cost.
Yes, because all of these massive moves, the 5-year suspension of democracy and the pivot to Russian military support, they are all justified by the Traore doctrine as the absolute only way to defeat the extremists.
And the scale of that extremist threat really cannot be overstated. Burkina Faso is currently the global epicenter of extremist violence.
The global epicenter, not just the region.
The entire world. Insurgent groups control vast swaths of territory. They are laying siege to towns, cutting off critical supply lines. The military is operating under unimaginable pressure.
But the newest data we have, this brand new April 2026 report from Human Rights Watch, it reveals a truly devastating reality about how that war is actually being fought.
It's a very tough reach.
Here's where it gets really interesting and, frankly, deeply disturbing.
Yeah.
The Human Rights Watch report contains a bombshell allegation backed by extensive documentation. They are reporting that government security forces in Burkina Faso have actually killed more civilians than the extremist groups they're supposed to be fighting.
Wow. That is a statistic that forces you to reevaluate the entire narrative of the conflict.
Completely.
It is a catastrophic indictment of the state's military strategy.
To put that into perspective, it's as if the fire department you called to save your burning house showed up. And their aggressive methods, like maybe they decided to just bulldoze the entire block to stop the flames from spreading, ended up causing more death and destruction to the neighborhood than the fire itself.
That's a brutal analogy, but it's accurate.
You called them for protection, and they became the primary source of the devastation. How does a government that claims to be leading a progressive popular revolution survive a revelation like that?
It's a massive contradiction.
Right, because if you are killing the very citizens you claim to be mobilizing to protect, the entire moral foundation of your regime crumbles.
This raises an important question, and it is really the mechanical core of why human rights organizations monitor these shifts so closely.
Okay, what's the question?
What actually happens on the battlefield when you remove all domestic and international oversight in the name of efficiency?
You're talking of the ripple effect of dissolving the political parties and kicking out the Western monitors?
Exactly. Think about the tactical mechanism at play here. When a military government dissolves the parliament, silences the political opposition, and criminalizes independent journalism, they don't just pause the abstract concept of democracy.
What do?
They eliminate the physical watchdogs. There is no local member of parliament to stand up and demand an investigation when a village is attacked.
Right.
There is no opposition leader to leak a scandal to the press.
So the black box of war gets sealed completely shut.
Inside that black box, you have a military apparatus that has been granted absolute unchecked power.
And they're desperate for a win.
Exactly. They are operating alongside foreign paramilitaries who have zero local accountability. They are desperate to show results, to prove that their radical geopolitical pivot was actually worth it.
Right, they have to justify kicking out the French and hiring the Russians.
Yes. And historically, when an armed force operates with absolute impunity and is under immense pressure to deliver victories, the rules of engagement deteriorate at a terrifying speed.
They just start shooting.
The distinction between an armed extremist combatant and a terrified civilian farmer becomes completely blurred.
And eventually it gets erased entirely. But walk us through how Human Rights Watch even compiles this data. Because if the country is a black box, like you said, how do we know the government is killing more civilians than the terrorists?
That's a great question. Human Rights Watch and similar organizations use highly sophisticated methodologies, even in heavily contested war zones.
Like what?
Well, they rely on encrypted communications with local survivors and whistleblowers, for one.
Okay, so people on the ground are risking their lives to send this info out.
Yes. They also analyze satellite imagery to track the destruction of villages, matching the timestamps of burned structures with the known movements of military convoys versus insurgent groups.
Oh, wow. So they can see exactly who was where when a village burned down.
Exactly. They cross-reference grave sites, hospital admissions, and even bullet casings. And the tactical pattern that emerges from this data is incredibly grim.
I can imagine.
In a paranoid counterinsurgency, security forces often begin to view entire populations as complicit. If a village is suspected of harboring extremists, even if the villagers were literally held hostage at gunpoint by those extremists, the military often treats the entire village as a hostile target.
So they punish the victims.
Yes. The state forces act as judge, jury, and executioner out in the field because there is no civilian judicial system left with the power to restrain them.
It is the ultimate tragedy of authoritarian security measures. I mean, the Traore government asked the nation to accept a 5-year coma to save the patient, but the doctor is the one causing